Our system in the UK, for me, too much is focused on high achieving pupils in high achieving schools. There's been a benchmark, the standard. That's where the Ofsted outstanding grades, traditionally are. But I tell you what, some of the schools and colleges I've worked in, when you're working with less advantaged young people from areas of disadvantage, A, it's incredibly rewarding. B, it can be incredibly tiring and also sometimes incredibly frustrating. But I tell you what, that was my best experience of education, working with young people and seeing them grow and develop. Amazing. And again, seeing them get into jobs that they didn't necessarily think that they would be able to do. That's Amazing. What being a teacher is. That's what satisfaction is.
Welcome to Will Talks, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I have this incredible person with me, Robert Hindle. Robert Hindle is a professor, a lecturer at the University of Manchester. He works with teacher trainees, students who are looking at becoming teachers and joining the education system, joining schools and colleges in the UK. Robert has a lot of experience working with schools and school leaders in India as well. So he has this unique combination of the UK as well as the Indian system of education and working with teachers. Robert, we are so happy that you have been able to take time out and come over to our studios and have this amazing conversation with us.
It's a pleasure, Willie. It's really nice to be here again.
Fantastic. And it's nice and warm this
Fantastic. It's been
winter.
-7 in the UK the last couple of weeks. So this is a lovely climate change for me, yeah.
Beautiful. We had a speaker who came in yesterday, and as a matter of practice, we ask an outgoing speaker, an outgoing guest, to ask a question for the next guest, and he doesn't know who the next guest is. The question he asked was, how do you manifest good things in your life?
That's a good question, isn't it? I think you can answer that on a sort of personal level, but also as a professional too. I think it's doing things that you enjoy, isn't it? That's what makes you happy. For me, that's things like being with friends. It's keeping active, going swimming regularly, traveling. I was really excited to arrive in Mumbai the other day after 3 years. I've not been here since COVID. So actually that made me happy to be back in India and, back and seeing the things that I enjoy and speaking to the people that I enjoy speaking to. So I think that's a big thing for sort of personal happiness. And I think sometimes that can go together with professional happiness too. Professional happiness means that you're doing something that is engaging, that you're enjoying. For me, something that adds value. I think, most educators would say the same thing, wouldn't they, about what happens in the classroom, seeing students learn, seeing colleagues develop, helping to sort of coach them to improve and also being challenged. I mean, one thing that makes us happy is facing new challenges and getting through them and finding new problems to solve. So all those things, I think, add to our happiness. I think sometimes, we get this assumption, don't you, that money and happiness sort of don't go together or do go together. And, we need to be rewarded for what we do. But happiness is actually making that connection with other people, isn't it? With places, with things, with books, with podcasts. Yes. These are things that can make us happy as well, can't they? Because they make us start to think. So happiness for me goes with thinking.
Oh, beautiful. And I remember this point you just said about many teachers may say the same thing. As teachers, I think they're always in the developmental business, the development, the business of development, developing children. So many times I've asked teachers, what makes you happy? Is it the money or is it the reverence? And time again, we've had people say exactly what you say. They feel good and they feel happy when they see their children doing better.
Yeah.
Yeah. And is that the same in the UK?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you're in teaching for the right reasons, it's all about seeing the young people in your classroom develop, improve, whether that be their literacy skills, their numeracy skills. In my subject, economics, it's their subject knowledge and their understanding of the world around them. But actually the big thing for me, particularly teaching older students, is seeing them progress. Whether it's an email to say they've got into the university they wanted to get to, whether it's asking for a reference after they've graduated, whether it's a request on LinkedIn to say thank you or to tell you what they're doing. that's the really satisfying bit about being a teacher, seeing people go and use the skills they've learned in the classroom, sometimes for the greater good and sometimes for the betterment of themselves. And education is meant to sort of light fires, isn't it? It's meant to sort of set sparks in people's minds and make them start to think about what they can do, whether that's helping others, whether that's personal development, whether that's because they love the subject that they do, whether it's a leadership role for the first time. So all these things, again, you see the sort of personal benefit you might have provided to other people as a teacher. And I think there's no substitute for that. And I think particularly when you're working with colleagues who have the same values, share that same purpose of actually helping people to develop. And again, being in a workplace like that, there's nothing more satisfying for me. So that's, again, back to where I'd be happiest.
That's amazing. In India, what I've noticed is there are teacher training colleges, commonly called the B.Ed colleges. And every year, 200 or 300 students, 20, 22, 23 years old, they join to become a teacher. And now it's a 2-year course, and eventually we're moving to a 4-year course. In your case, what I understand is you have to go out and find teachers. You have to find people to become teachers. And there's so much talk around the world about schools not working, education systems being broken and not being relevant in today's fast-changing VUCA world, right? World which is always changing, volatile, uncertain. How do you find these teachers, and then how do you motivate them, and how do you bring that spirit of hope in them? Is that something that you'd want to
I think some people have that already. They absolutely genuinely know they want to be teachers. So they finish their undergraduate degree in the UK, and they naturally then apply to do what we call a PGCE, a postgraduate certificate in education. It's a 1-year course to train in primary education or a specific subject in secondary. And for some people, that's always what they've wanted to do. So there's always a few of those every year. But I think increasingly, certainly the course that I run, I'd say that typically somebody maybe is 24, 25, perhaps done some things already, maybe looking to change career into something. And that's something they've often thought long and hard about. And back to your point about teacher recruitment, in the UK, there really is a teacher recruitment crisis now. I mean, there has been for a number of years in some specialist subjects. Now it's almost across the board that it's getting very, very hard for schools and colleges to find teachers. And my personal view about that is actually, as teachers, back to the previous question, we don't really talk enough about the value that it provides to us, the satisfaction that we get from seeing young people develop and improve. Too often, I think, new people who are thinking of being teachers are worried about behaviour management in the classroom, perhaps worried about working hours, maybe worried about social status, that they've gone through all this trouble of getting a degree, maybe from a very good university, and actually there might be something better, in inverted commas, they can do than be a teacher. But actually, is there a better thing to do than sort of, talk about your subject in the classroom, be passionate about that, seeing young people really enthuse about it and develop? I might be sort of preaching to the converted, but that is really what being a teacher is. I think the other thing is that there are so many more opportunities now in the UK for graduates, particularly in subjects like business and economics. There's lots of other things that they can do, lots of other employers looking to take them on, and therefore it becomes harder and harder to recruit people to becoming teachers. Maybe it's something that people do later. Maybe we need to sort of focus a bit harder on people moving from another career into teaching. But I think it's also a phenomenon we're seeing in the United States, we're seeing in Australia, and the UK, US, Australia have got pretty similar school systems. And a lot of that is results-based. The schools inspector at Ofsted can put lots of pressure on schools, certainly on head teachers and senior leadership teams. They might be visiting every 2 years, every 4 years. So those pressures sometimes begin to bite as well. And that's another reason why, people, I think, decide not to be teachers or to leave teaching, which is sad. It really is.
So in the UK, someone told me that if you walk in London for 10 minutes, you will be captured by over 200 different CCTV cameras. Okay?
Quite probably.
That is what somebody told me.
Yeah.
And they also hinted that perhaps we've done a little too much of detailing in the UK. Okay, and I'm specifically talking about the UK because that's the example that I had. Yeah. There was another case that I saw about UK-based UK playgrounds, children's playgrounds in the UK. And they were built for so much safety that it's virtually impossible for a child to fall down and scrape his knee. So the question I'm asking is, do you feel, and it's just your personal opinion, do you feel has anything been taken too far in a developed country, be it the UK or the US or Australia? Because on one end, there is this whole narrative that the public school education system is not working, there's long working hours, yet we produce children who are able to think. Because in India, we're looking at so many of these charter school models, think, creation, thinking. Whereas in India, many of us are so focused on completing the portion, completing the syllabus, getting the work done. And a lot is self-regulation here. Whereas there's a lot of regulation. Any thoughts around that one?
Yeah, very good question, that one. I think in terms of sort of CCTV and regulation and monitoring of young people, that's a really big feature of what we call safeguarding in the UK. So ensuring that while students, young people, are in the care of the school and the staff there, that actually nothing untoward happens. Whether that's monitoring what they're doing in the playground, whether it's monitoring what their searches are on the computer at break time and lunchtime, monitoring their well-being for signs of, let's say, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and so on. Safeguarding's a big thing. There's 2 or 3 things, I think, that mean that is really, really important. One is particularly after lockdowns in COVID, we've seen a real increase in young people exhibiting anxiety, mental health concerns. We've got an increasing number of young people, around about 10-15% in some schools, are now being educated from home because they find actually being in school quite a challenging thing, and that makes them, very, very anxious. So I think COVID has got some responsibility for that. Is it also, though, a case of actually young people have been wrapped in cotton wool for too long because teachers are worried about them failing, they're not allowed to fail, there's a safety blanket under them? Again, back to your example as to whether that's because they're tripping up in the playground, they might fail a test or fail an exam. So have we created a system in which there's actually too much cotton wool, there's too much support? And actually sometimes not doing well at something is an important learning process in itself. And actually having to work out a solution sometimes for yourself rather than to rely upon a teacher or a pastoral leader to do it. I think there's an awful lot of value in that too. CCTV is another massive thing in the UK in terms of the sort of whole big data approach, certainly to things like policing, being able to sort of monitor where people are and what they're doing, embodied, of course, by the Chinese state are doing that more than any other. But schools, in some respects, are doing that too because they want the technology's there, and because it's there, they can use it. So I think there's the safeguarding agenda is important and it's legitimate in many ways. But actually, I do think maybe in some respects it's gone too far. Children need to be children. They need to learn what it means to actually become a bit more self-reliant. Certainly some do anyway. And again, perhaps schools could do a bit more to allow that. But again, back to this sort of fear of Ofsted, if a school is failed on its safeguarding systems, then immediately it's downgraded to something called inadequate, which is the lowest grade that the school's inspectorate gives.
Some of the people listening to us today may not know, or most of them may not know what the Ofsted is.
Yeah,
and when you say there's a school inspection, what does that mean? And how it impacts the school and funding of schools. That would be someone told me there was less than 100 private schools in the UK or less than 1,000 private schools. And the total number of schools in the UK were only 28,000. Whereas in India, we have almost 2 million schools. So the scale is very different. We want to just talk a little bit more about...
Yeah, of course I can. So
unbundle that for us. What is Ofsted?
Absolutely. So all state sector schools in the UK are regulated. They're regulated by an organisation that's set up to be independent of government, and that's called the Office for Standards and Education, shortened to Ofsted. What they do, they inspect all primary schools, all secondary schools, all early years providers. So again, pre-primary settings, for example, also health and social care settings, colleges, all of those institutions. In addition, university teacher training courses are all inspected by Ofsted. So this word inspect means that over a particular period of time, it could be over like a 6-year period, a school might get an Ofsted inspection every 2 years, every 4 years, sometimes even as little as every 10 years. And the way that that's worked out is that the school, when it's inspected, is given a grade by Ofsted. That grade could be a grade 1, outstanding, a grade 2, good, a grade 3, requires improvement, or a grade 4, inadequate. Now, schools are clearly striving in what is sometimes quite a competitive market for young people to get an outstanding. So that's the sort of holy grail of education, to get an Ofsted outstanding, to have the badge that says that you can have on your website, tell your parents, tell students and so on. Again, if a school or a college is outstanding, it might only be inspected every 10 years, every 7 years, every 8 years. If a school gets a good, then the monitoring period is every 4 years. If a school gets a requires improvement grade, then Ofsted will be back within 18 months or 2 years looking for improvements in that school. And if the school gets an inadequate grade, then it probably will get something called a category. And a category means that it might get something called special measures or serious weaknesses. Now, in those circumstances, what would normally happen is that the head teacher and probably the governing board of the school, who sort of regulate what the school does, they're probably going to be removed if that grade 4 inadequate comes into place.
You mean the principal or
Principal
the
will
deputy?
be going, yeah, absolutely. We'll probably
They're
end
like,
up going.
off you go.
Yeah, probably. In most cases, yeah.
Would they go to another school?
They might do. I mean, but the problem then for them is if they've got a CV which has got an adequate grade, a grade 4, that becomes very hard for them to go and work in a different
So
school.
it goes into their CV.
Yeah, if they apply for another job, then the panel at interview at the new school that they've applied to will know where they worked previously. They'll know what the Ofsted report said. And that might be, almost the end of their career sometimes. So, it's really sort of high stakes accountability. It is. And even dropping to requires improvement, then you've got 18 months to try and improve and get back to good. But equally, if you have too many requires improvement grades, then the inspectorate might downgrade you again to inadequate. And think as well about the reputational damage locally as well of those sorts of grades too. So this high stakes accountability is one of the big reasons why it's becoming harder and harder to find head teachers in schools in the UK. So outstanding schools, well, again, okay, maintaining that outstanding can be challenging sometimes, particularly given the last few years we've had in terms of COVID and exams and so on. But with an outstanding on your CV, then again, it's much easier for you to go on and get another job. But even some outstanding schools now are finding it hard to find head teachers. They're really finding it very difficult. Again, it's a level of stress that pursues. And related to the earlier point that you made, good schools aren't made by one head teacher. Good schools are made by really effective, hardworking, diligent, committed teachers. So they've got to buy in to the culture that the head teacher or the principal wants to sort of espouse in the school, wants to sort of bring into the school. And at times when actually recruiting teachers is challenging, even maintaining good and outstanding in some parts of the UK is proving quite challenging, particularly in London, particularly in the southeast. It's so much more expensive to live there. So as a public servant on a teacher's salary, even with something that we call a London weighting, an additional salary that you get in the UK if you work in London.
Oh, really?
Even with that, it can be quite challenging and quite hard to recruit.
I love the way you say teachers are public servants, because everybody who's in teaching, be it a deputy, a head teacher, a principal, they're all public servants. And that is something that we should never forget. This reminds me of a conversation you and I had about 4 years ago. And I remember you saying, Willie, when you want to be talking to teachers, you want to depersonalize. Because all our talk about improving, being excellent, staying good, that's going to require a lot of talking, a lot of influencing, a lot of feedback, a lot of critical conversations, a lot of crucial conversations, a lot of difficult conversations, a lot of goodbyes maybe, a lot of hello, can we get cracking? And suddenly the head teacher or the academic managers who are in charge of teachers, who are in charge of learning, they need to have a skill set that can allow people or allow their colleagues to feel motivated, inspired, and challenged, even when they're not doing well. Do you want to repeat that? Do you want to help me understand it even better? Is that a skill that principals will need? Because you're always looking at improvement.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I think the whole point of depersonalising is when you're giving feedback to a teacher, let's say after you've observed a lesson, something that I do fairly regularly in my job now, it's really important that that young person, particularly who's training to be a teacher for the first time, doesn't take that as a personal insult or, a personal quality of it being super or wonderful. It's about their professional development. So moving away from personal feedback. Personally, it's always going to be personal in the sense that it's specific to that young person's lesson or that particular teacher's lesson. But I think the idea of depersonalising it is recognising that you're giving feedback to a teacher and a human being as well. And as human beings, we also are sensitive. We want praise, we want development, and we're not always willing to have our sort of weaknesses picked out by somebody else. So I think the way that we package that feedback is very important to say, right, well, okay, today I thought this, and this was good. Do you agree? What do you think about it? Can you sort of self-assess the way that your lesson went today? Okay, well, what would you do differently? How would you change it? And that's sometimes a route in to agreeing some particular targets that they might have for the next time that I come, the next time I visit, and the next time I see them in the classroom. So the way that that's done has to be in a very supportive way. It has to be professionally critical, professionally rigorous. But I can still have a professionally rigorous conversation by treating that person as a human being and treating them as a person who wants development, wants positive feedback. So we actually talk about the steps that are required to get them from point A to point B next time. So it's those professional steps. Are you going to observe some other teachers? Are you going to go and watch some videos on YouTube that I'm suggesting? Are you going to read some blogs or read an article? What will you do? What's part of your action plan to get from A to B? And then hopefully I'm coming across as somebody who's not making a judgment on today, sort of high stakes judgments about the quality of your teaching today, but supporting you and helping you improve your teaching from point A to point B. Now, in an ideal world, that conversation isn't a difficult one because you want a teacher to buy into the way that nothing is ever perfect and they can continue to develop. But some people will take that highly personally and find it very difficult to take on professionally critical feedback. And so sometimes you have to have conversations outside the classroom to try and develop that criticality, try and find out what it was that made them take things very personally. Again, it could be that they lack trust. It could be they lack trust in you or trust in people who perhaps have done similar things with them before and blabbed all around the school that this particular lesson that they taught wasn't very good. So it's the nature of the conversation that is really, really important, and recognising that sometimes it's about building people's personal confidence, but it's also building them to a point where naturally they're looking to be able to say, that was good, that was good, that was good. And as humans, we're not always able to self-assess positively sometimes, are we? We're not always finding it easy to say, my strengths are this. So it's building a mindset where people can say, yeah, I'm good at that and that and that, and I'm developing those skills. But actually, I need to work on this and this and this, and this is what I'll do to go and do it. So for me, the way to do that is try to depersonalize the conversation and make it a professional conversation where criticality and rigor are part of that. And that takes some time sometimes.
Criticality and rigor. So that brings me to my next thinking question, right? While everyone thinks that when you hire somebody new, let's say a new principal or a new teacher, everyone says that this new recruit or this talent is going to learn. I think the error that many of us might possibly be guilty of is giving too less time, thinking that learning might happen too fast, too soon. And within 6 months, if you look at a typical teacher contract, maybe the teacher is on probation for 6 months. And a principal needs to take a call on if this teacher is worth keeping over that 6 months, or even a trust might take a decision to keep a new principal for a year. And then, so any idea on really how much time it takes for somebody to learn, get a full understanding of the context, and start really performing well? Any idea around that? I know you can't give a very sharp answer to that because it's highly contextual, but what would be a way to think around this aspect?
Yeah, it's a good question, isn't it? 'Cause I think the first thing to say
when is enough?
Yeah, absolutely. As sort of head teachers and principals, you want a teacher who arrives in school to be as developed and as professional as possible. So that's the starting point, isn't it? I think the training year in the UK for teachers is so crucial at helping people realise the importance of, running to stand, basically. So, you're landing on your feet and you're running straight away when you're in that school. So it means that you've made a really good effort on your teaching training programme. You understand the importance of continuous improvement. I think the decision about whether to keep somebody or not, I think that's down to their professionalism, their readiness, their willingness to learn. If you've got time and capacity within your senior leadership team to help develop somebody and know how far away they are from being the article that you need them to be in the classroom. I think in exam classes and exam subjects, so when you're teaching in the UK A-level classes and GCSE classes, again, there's a bit more pressure there. People have got to be ready to be able to deliver those lessons and improve those results, because that's what young people and parents want. And it's what in the UK the school effectively is measured on. The way that the inspectorate works has changed a little bit the last 3 years, but still fundamentally the hard currency that young people want from school and college is the results, whether that's to get into college, whether it's to get to university, whether it's to get the graduate job that they want. I think when you have to make a tough decision about getting rid of someone, I think you've got to see that they either are unwilling to learn, they find it hard to show the professional qualities, things like wanting to continuously improve. Perhaps they find the working hours too long. Perhaps they're not making good connections in the classroom with students, because fundamentally good teachers like being in the classroom. They like building strong professional relationships with students. I think when those things are absent, you've got to ask, what's the capacity of this person to be able to improve?
That brings me on to multiple questions. And I'm going to ask you multiple questions so that you can decide how do you want to approach that answer. Because my questions are usually complex and don't necessarily have a clear answer, right? So one of the things that I want to ask you is when you say professionalism, a lot of Indian principals and teachers may feel that's about how one dresses, greets each other, comes on time, reliability, obedience. Is that what we mean by professionalism when it comes to teachers? That's my first question. So unbundling what you mean by professionalism would be very insightful for me. Because I'm also mindful of the fact that you may use a lot of words assuming that I understand it. So I'm clarifying that. So that
absolutely.
You can really unbundle it for us. So one is professionalism in teachers and principals, and what does that mean? And what does that look like? And what are those skills, traits, values, and hard skills that we're talking about? The second question comes from a statement that you helped me understand a few years ago as you were coaching me to be a better school transformer. You said, Willie, children need the best teachers every day because they deserve it.
True.
They come to school
They do.
deserving the absolute best teaching.
They do.
And so when I was in IIM Ahmedabad, we were looking at the strategic management in school program. And the professor there explained that there are two types of schools: schools which are harvesting schools and schools which are investing schools. A harvesting school is a school that pays top dollar, gets the best, interviews 500 teachers, selects one. She hits the road running, or she, gets on with it, starts the class, and she's doing phenomenally well. And the minute she drops a standard, she's out of the school. You send warning letters of advisors, and she's off. Whereas on the other hand, there's an investing school. A school that believes that teachers can grow, they can do better, and they can constantly improve. And they understand that the teacher is perhaps not at the place where they want the teacher to be right now, but they would invest time, energy, resources, and effort in building a social intellectual capital to ensure that she's able to build learning capital in the classroom. My big complex question there is the collateral damage paid by children at that point in time? And if it is so, what can I think about to continue to encourage learning, yet getting children to be deserving of the quality of education that they need?
Yeah, two good questions. Lots of food for thought there, Willie, as well. I think on professionalism, it's not very helpful necessarily, but in the UK, the Department for Education, which is the government department that's responsible for schools and colleges in the UK, it's separate from Ofsted, as I was saying before, but they have produced a set of national teacher standards.
Is this open to download?
Yeah, you can download online for the Department for Education website. They've been updated regularly like the last 10 or 15 years. The Australian system is a little bit different, so it's run by different states. Victoria has its own standards, New South Wales, Queensland, etc. Similarly, in the United States and Canada, there are different school standards in the US and in Canadian schools, again, organised by province sometimes.
So principals can look for teaching standards across the country.
They can,
a guiding
indeed.
document that brings it down.
They can. I mean, the interesting thing is there will be a little bit of similarity across those sort of international teaching standards, but actually been an awful lot of differences too. And that's back to your point. How can you almost design a recipe for a perfect teacher? Because that's effectively what national standards seek to do, don't they? They try and identify particular features of your teaching that produce this, this perfect biryani, in an example that you once used in the past. And is that biryani perfect? No, it's not, because there's certain ingredients that perhaps need to develop next time you cook it. And it's again back to deciding what the perfect ingredients are to begin with. So there's some criticism about that in the sense that it's not an exact science. But I think back to this conversation about what professional means. I think if you asked a head teacher or a principal, they'd probably say what professional behaviour means in their particular school. And I think that's probably underpinned by some basics. Enjoying working with young people, investing in your own continuous professional development, seeking to improve your teaching. Again, communicating effectively with colleagues, whether that's arriving on time, whether that's attendance, whether that's working collectively and collaboratively with your colleagues on designing teaching approaches and teaching resources, whether it's actually working closely with non-teaching staff. In the UK, we have teaching assistants sometimes who work with young people in the room who might need extra help or might have a special educational need. So working collectively with them in terms of planning to help support the progress of those young people is really, really important. So all that's professionalism, but fundamentally, professionalism is recognising this issue of public service. This idea that what you are doing is about the students. Now, sometimes in any job, we can go too far with that, can't we? We can invest too much of ourselves into the job, and that's what then leads to sometimes breakdowns, mental health challenges, or actually just waking up one morning in your 50s and thinking, well, I've worked for 50 years, what else might I have done? And hence the importance of work-life balance too. So I think actually professionalism sometimes as well is recognising when to say, right, I'm going to leave it there for today. Yeah, I want a bit of family time this weekend. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to go and do this. And it's that reinvestment, recharging ourselves that can often make us a better teacher in future. That's really crucial to be able to do that. But is that a conversation that we can all confidently have in a school staff room, in a head teacher's office, when the national standards also tell us that we need to be delivering exam results for students? Because back to your second question about students, yes, they do deserve the best. So at what point do we say, actually, those results that you got in your first year of teaching weren't good enough? At what point do we have the conversation, actually, let's see how we can improve those next year. Let's see what we can do to help you to develop. And this is back to a system designed to pass judgment on young people, whether they're a grade 9 at GCSE, an 8, a 7, 6, 5, right the way down to grade 1, again, which is the bottom grade at GCSE in the UK. A-level, A-star being the top grade, A, B, C, D, E, U being the lowest grade. We're passing judgments, we're sort of setting watermarks where young people are in different subjects. It's very easy to transfer that same judgment onto our teachers. Yeah, so we make a judgment based upon one set of results or two sets of results. So again, that's back to what does it mean to invest in your teachers? For me, that means collegiality. It means that support doesn't come from just that mentor in the school who's working with that person once a week, once a half term. It comes from teams, very effective middle and senior leaders willing to help. But it also means that actually as an individual teacher, I've also got to recognise that I need to seek out support. I need to be proactive in the way that I seek to try to find that. And again, if I'm doing that and I'm seeing that improvement, then that's what head teachers and principals are quite happy to accept. You know, as a teacher, I'm sure it's the same for you. I could, even 10, 11 years into teaching, I could see how my teaching was improving. And one of the things that I did that really improved my own teaching was actually become responsible for teaching and learning in the college I worked at. Because then I had the absolute privilege of going out and observing other teachers in the classroom to try and find out as a college what our strengths and weaknesses were in teaching and learning. But it was wonderful because I saw lots of really, really good practice and ideas that I wouldn't normally have seen. And I could bring that into my own teaching.
So one of the things that immediately comes to my mind as a stark difference as you speak about professional development and learning, I've heard principals tell me that many of the teachers in schools feel that it is the school's responsibility to develop them professionally, because many of teachers in India feel I'm doing a job. If you want me to do better at my job, it's your responsibility to train me. And what I'm hearing from you is that it has to be an innate personal drive for somebody to develop oneself better.
Yeah, you've got to want to do it, haven't you? You know, on the one hand, teachers like to be trained. It's something that they can add to their CV. There's something they can talk about at another job interview. But actually, you know, no teacher is perfect at questioning, at adapting the teaching for different ability groups in the classroom, supporting young people with autistic spectrum disorder, for example. You know, we're all different at these things. So actually, we should still be looking to develop in these areas as well. I think there's sometimes a misunderstanding of things like technology, almost as if actually technology is the way that we enhance teaching. And in many ways, it might be. But actually, isn't that sort of just as a bit of a frilly bit of tinsel on the Christmas tree? Isn't that really what it is? You know, fundamentally, does technology add to the classroom? It certainly adds variety. You know, things like Kahoots and Socrative quizzes where teachers can design their own MCQs for work with students. They're often free accounts to begin with. They can add some variety. They can get us some formative assessment back on particular groups of students and how they're doing. But nothing is better than an individual check-in with a young person in the classroom, individual conversations at gauging what they know and what they can do. And more importantly with that, helping to build their confidence and their own self-development to help them to improve. Now, I would say no training course can make you realise that you need to have those personal skills in the classroom with those young people. I would say that's something that you've got or you haven't. And I think it's probably why many people came into teaching in the first instance.
They felt it.
Absolutely.
And they wanted to extend that into everything they're doing in life.
I think teachers have got to get some pleasure and some satisfaction from seeing other people develop.
Yeah.
Now, give me another job that does that. Medicine, maybe.
Sure.
Nursing, social care. Mm-hmm. You know, we see people get better and develop through those jobs.
So here's my thing to you, right? So I was born in the 90s. I'm in my 40s now. So a lot of the idea that my friends have about the UK and a lot of our teachers have about the UK and the US is that everybody's rich, everybody knows English, everybody has a car, even the poor has a car, you know, and it's just that we are all suffering here in India. So that's my first statement for you to react on or respond about. The second statement I wanted to make was I spoke to a few principals. There was a principal of the American school, the superintendent of the American School of Mumbai. And I spoke to, and there was another principal there who was from a very affordable private school. And the principal of the affordable private school was saying that I really have a problem with my teachers. I'm not able to coach them. I'm not getting the right talent. I just don't feel like they're able to translate all their knowledge and experience into learning in children. And surprisingly, I heard the superintendent of the American School of Bombay also say that. He said, you know what? I've got teachers from 20 different countries. And I have a leader, my primary school leader is from Australia. My secondary is perhaps from the UK, and the whole school leader is from the US. And suddenly we're dealing with all these very skilled, experienced people who have studied in different systems and have different viewpoints about where education should go, and yet we're running one school. So for me, the big learning from that conversation was, oh my God, you got to work with whoever has showed up. You got to work with, I mean, somebody at the highest point, we feel that everyone, there are no problems that they have, but apparently so, that's not true. So what are your thoughts about the first and second statements?
Two more good questions. I think the UK's certainly, not the place that it, people might think from the outside that it is. I mean, we do have a great deal of income inequality in the UK. I think our average salary might sound a lot to the typical Indian. It's around sort of £28,000 a year.
That is about 2,000 something pounds, which is about 2 lakhs a month. But it's not 2 lakhs.
No, that's a year. Yeah, £28,000 a year. Yeah. I mean, and the other thing with that is that about 2/3 of the population earn less than that. So in terms of our income inequality, it's really wide. We've got a small number of very, very high earners who bring up the average salary. And we've got a concept in the UK which might sound a bit alien, a bit strange here, which is the idea of in-work poverty. And that is
in-work poverty.
Yeah, so actually people's wages are pretty low. We've got a national minimum wage now of about £10 per hour if you're over 25. So, that certainly helps. But if you're on £10 an hour and so is your partner and you've got 2 children to try to feed,
can you afford it then?
Absolutely, with the cost of housing as it is in the UK, the cost of our energy bills rising. So actually it can be quite tough to make ends meet. So the government often tops up the earnings of people on lower incomes with something called universal credit, which again is paid to sort of lower income families.
So a teacher could enter a classroom and she can't assume that every child in a classroom in the UK has had a stomach full, slept peacefully, had a good family environment, and comes from a native English speaking background.
No, not at all. Round about 26% of young people in secondary schools in the UK, the school receives additional funding for them because they receive what's called pupil premium funding. What that means is it's likely that their families earn less than £10,000 a year, which is obviously less than half the average. And that probably will be that the majority of that income is paid by the government in benefits and universal credit. Now imagine those families trying to pay gas and electricity bills, the cost of living crisis, inflation in the UK, the rate of increase in prices is roughly around 10%. We've got a huge amount of strikes taking place, mainly in the public sector in the UK at the moment, whether it's teachers, whether it's university academics, whether it's ambulance drivers, train drivers, border force staff. Again, they're on strike because they need to be able to pay these bills. But the real typical feature of the UK now is this disparity between rich and poor, which is getting more. Absolutely. And you could even argue the education system within itself creates that. It certainly perpetuates this idea of inequality. So the best schools, outstanding schools, very often have already got outstanding students, outstanding parents. Not always the case, but very often it's in more middle class, high achieving areas where average salaries might be a bit higher. Then perhaps there's a bit more pressure on teachers to deliver results because you've got more able and committed pupils. But equally, you've not perhaps got the behavioural challenges, the safeguarding issues that you might have in an inner city school in London or an inner city school in Manchester. There are schools in London and Manchester with 60% of their pupils are on free school meals.
Free school meals?
Yeah, 60% easily, sometimes even a little bit higher than that. And that's way above the national average. Now, if you're at school...
And free school meal is not luxury because the government is so expensive. The government has so much money that you're getting free. It's because they can't actually get food. It's the Indian school meal program.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically the school pays a free hot meal for that young person at lunchtime. And in some schools, you do see pupils racing down the stairs when the bell goes at lunch because that'll be their hot meal that they get during the day. And maybe when they get home, they might get some pot snack or maybe nothing sometimes. So we are seeing that. The number of food banks in the UK has increased massively the last 5 or 10 years. Now, a food bank is where a voluntary sector organisation gets donations of food from families who perhaps have got a bit more money. And again, poorer families come to that food bank and they can get food, whether it's pasta, whether it's bread, whether it's meat, whether it's fish, whether it's cans of baked beans, cans of tomatoes, whatever. And again, there'll be a food parcel for that family that they can collect from that food bank. There's an amazing organisation in the UK called the Trussell Trust that organises, I think, thousands of food banks nationwide. But we've got an increasing amount of families who bring their kids to school who have to use those food banks as well. So the UK education system teaches in the UK, particularly in areas where there might be families suffering from economic disadvantage, relatively low incomes. As you were saying earlier, it's quite possible somebody will only get one hot meal and that will be in school. Again, have they got somewhere at home to study? Have they got somebody at home who's a responsible adult who understands the value of education? Not everyone has. Have they also got some quite significant personal safeguarding issues that are happening at home as well? Or, some way in which the family perhaps is finding life difficult. So all these things manifest themselves in the way that kids behave when they get into school. They all impact on the behaviour of young people there. That's not to say that we should start what we call in the UK deficit thinking.
Deficit thinking.
The idea just because somebody's from a less advantaged background that they're not going to achieve. We can't do that.
So that's why they talk about high expectations.
Yeah, that's why high
expectations. And that's got nothing to do with increasing stress and having unrealistic expectations in terms of results, correct?
Yeah, I think high expectations has got to be two things. I think it's got to be results. I think it's got to be aspirations. And it's also trying to give, in some cases, young people aspirations, get them to think about what they want to do. Absolutely. Whether that's good quality careers education, whether it's thinking of a college course they want to do. So as a college teacher for a very long time, the difference when students arrive in college from school, and they didn't necessarily enjoy school, but, 6 months into their college life, they're a changed person. They're doing 3 subjects that they want to study. They're thinking about university. They're thinking about careers. It can really be an important moment if you sort of signpost them in those directions of aspirations. So for me, high expectations are crucial. Teachers need to have high expectations of pupils. Pupils need to have high expectations of themselves. And for me, it's recognising some of those issues that young people might come to school with, in the sense that there might be it might explain behavioural issues, it might explain underachievement, but trying to do something about it. Trying to signpost young people to, again, what might be better, and sometimes even recognising your own experiences and talking to the young people in the room about your own experiences and sharing them, making them realise it isn't just them and they can still achieve. And that can sometimes be a challenging conversation with some young people, but actually, you'll deliver educational quality if you focus on that. Our system in the UK, for me, too much is focused on high achieving pupils in high achieving schools. There's been a benchmark, the standard. That's where the Ofsted outstanding grades, traditionally are. But I tell you what, some of the schools and colleges I've worked in, when you're working with less advantaged young people from areas of disadvantage, A, it's incredibly rewarding. B, it can be incredibly tiring and also sometimes incredibly frustrating. But I tell you what, that was my best experience of education, working with young people and seeing them grow and develop. Amazing. And again, seeing them get into jobs that they didn't necessarily think that they would be able to do. That's Amazing. What being a teacher is. That's what satisfaction is.
Amazing. Now, I'm going to ask you this first grade question. First grade as in a question you would ask a child in standard 1. Mm-hmm. With all the years of experience you've had in education back in the UK, with all the traveling that you've done across the country, meeting so many people from different ethnicities and races and countries and worldviews, if you were to run a school in India, if you were to run a school in India, what would that school look like? What would be some of the things you focus on? What would be some of your guiding principles? What would be some of the areas you think that we need to get right? And some of the things can be done later, right? What could that be if you had to share without any constraints of resources?
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I that's something I'd love to do at some stage. I think you've got to make the school a happy place. a place where staff and students want to come to every day. And that means it's a school which focuses on aspiration and achievement, a focus on learning, that learning doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes learning's about making mistakes and persevering and being resilient. So I think in that sense, it's those values that, underpin what the school means for staff and students. So it can be high achieving, but high achieving for staff means investing in staff, continuous professional development, having personal conversations with them, treating them as human beings, as people who are teachers, but also parents and carers and football fans and cricket fans and whatever, actually making them want to come to school because it's full of people who support them. One thing I always notice when I come to your school is also the leadership, the example that's set from the top, the availability that you have, that you make in your staff, the importance you attach to the key appointments you make in terms of who leads up secondary, who leads up primary, and how they exhibit the qualities that you want the teachers in your primary section, your secondary section to exhibit, and also to be able to learn from. And I think the thing with that is that, no manager or no leader is ever a finished article. So you have to build in some coaching for them, for some support for them, opportunities to say well done to people, opportunities to find out what they want to do in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time, where they want their career to develop, and support them in doing that. And when you get that bit right, I think that's when you start to get the student bit right too. And again, results are really important. Development of pupils is important, but some of the work that SwissTube do in terms of the videos that young people design about school values, they're great things to get kids thinking about what school is about and what they're learning while they're there and how they're preparing themselves for sort of life in future. So curriculum is important in that respect. What are the values that you want to bring into the school? What are the things that young people need to learn about India? Because again, that's where we are. That's where we are at the moment, whether that's Indian history, Indian systems, but also thinking more globally as well. Where do they want to be? As young people growing up now, then there's a strong possibility that we'll see more online working in the future. We'll see people working cross-continent, cross-time zones. So again, introducing people linguistically, culturally to diversity as well, and to recognising that diversity itself can be a strength. It isn't something to divide us, it's something actually to excite us, to sort of get us to think about the way that other people live in different countries too. So I think that curriculum design is such a key part there, and thinking about the key skills that you want young people to exhibit, midway through primary, midway through secondary, by the end of secondary, preparing them for that next stage in education, that's key. And that means, fundamentally, keeping your best staff. And if those best staff eventually have decided there's an opportunity for them to go somewhere else, reluctantly, you might write them a really nice reference because you recognise that they've gone as far as they can in that school and move. But ideally, you want your best staff to stay, and that means opportunities emerging for them. And that sometimes means thinking creatively about how you can further develop those staff too. So that's crucial. There's nothing worse than unhappy staff on a treadmill. So it's recognising that there needs to be a bit more of that and a bit more giving. But a go-to person for me is a central feature of an effective school and college. If I've got a problem or a concern, I might have the self-reliance to solve it, but sometimes a conversation with someone, even if it's like 5 or 10 minutes on Zoom or on Microsoft Teams or something, can be really helpful at just finding out what the issue is.
That's so brilliant, because looking at all the moving parts that work in a school and infusing spirit and soul and purpose and character and meaning so that our children get the skills, they get the rigor that they require, the cruciality of content and being able to perform, and yet creating a world that's going to be so wonderful for them to live in a sustainable way, bringing that school to you. So I really hope that people listening into this conversation are motivated and inspired to make their schools that one, and also probably invite you into their schools so that you could then help signboard it, signpost it.
It's about effective
as you
teams, isn't it? It's about, getting people on board and being the leader who brings people together, as you do in your school. That's crucial. You've got to have respect for the person who leads things, and they, again, need to sort of think about developing you. You do that, you get the best staff.
Amazing. So, as a customary on the Will Talks podcast, we ask a guest to have a question for the future guest, and you don't know who the future guest is. So, do you have a question that you would want to ask the future guest?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I think my question is, what are schools and universities for? That's my question. I'm particularly thinking now post-COVID, and again, as I mentioned, the sort of world we live in and the breadth of technology and social media. What are schools and universities for now? What are they about?
What are schools and universities for? What are they about now? Okay, that's going to be a question. And my final closing note, what's your favorite Indian food?
Indian food? God, goodness, I tell you what, I love masala dosa. There's a couple of places in London I can go to that serve an okay dosa, but actually there's no substitute for the dosas I can get in Maharashtra and in Mumbai. So I absolutely love a good masala dosa. So I'm looking forward to having one.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Robert. It has been such a pleasure, enlightening and enriching as always.
Nice to speak to you, Willie, as well. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Cheers.